So we had this sort of initial skirmish, this little shootout in downtown Tulsa involving some of the Black World War II veterans and this angry white mob desperate to lynch Dick Rowland. After that initial gunfight, the Black soldiers retreat into their homes, into Greenwood. But the white mob does not want this to be over. Sheriff's Department and law enforcement officials deputize some of these guys from the angry mob to continue the violence. Sheriffs instructed this angry white mob to, quote, get a gun and get a... So the people that were calling for a lynching 5 minutes before are now armed with guns from law enforcement and sent into Greenwood to chase the Black citizens down and continue this violence to get their revenge. And they do. Public officials provided firearms and ammunition to the angry mob, and law enforcement did absolutely nothing to stop the massacre that came next. Not only did they do nothing to stop it, they organized it. Look at this polite civil group of white people right here in downtown Tulsa lining up to get their guns and ammo. And up here, the Greenwood district in Tulsa is already starting to burn. So you have this angry white mob that grew to about 10,000 people at one point. They invade the Greenwood district of Tulsa, lighting everything on fire that they could see, shooting any Black citizens that they find in their path. Look at this. Burnt out cars, burning businesses, desolate streets. People are fleeing for their lives. Every single Black business that they came across in that Greenwood district was burned to the ground. Hotels, shops, the gas station, the newspaper building, everything. Nothing in town was spared. This was not a riot. This was revenge. People here watching while the church burned. Lit it on fire and watched it completely burned to the ground. In fact, we know that the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma was the first city in the United States to be bombed from the air because local white pilots went and got their own personal planes to drop homemade incendiary devices onto Greenwood. Of course, there's evidence in the photographs. All the tops of these buildings are on fire. That's suspicious. And we have many eyewitness accounts. I could hear something like hail falling upon the top of my office building. Down East Archer, I saw the old Midway Hotel on fire, burning from its top. And then another and another and another building began to burn from their top. These are photographs with captions made by the white photographers who took the photograph. Little Africa on Fire, Tulsa Race Riot, June 1st, 1921. Well, what were they using as bombs? Well, they were homemade devices. Turpentine ball bombs. So they would take scraps of cloth, dip them in turpentine, light them on fire, and throw them down at the Black buildings. Sticks of dynamite, and of course, the old standby, homemade Molotov cocktails. They would throw them from the planes down onto people's homes and roofs and just burn everything in sight. The destruction was catastrophic. Plenty of eyewitnesses saw this happen. Lurid flames roared and belched and licked their forked tongues into the air. Smoke ascended the sky in thick, Black volumes. Black homes and businesses were looted first and then burned to the ground. And then carloads of armed whites began shooting the Black residents in the neighborhood. This is a photograph from that day. You can see the houses on fire from their roofs and white people just strolling through the streets, checking it out, seeing what they can grab from some of these homes. This assault continued all night, May 31st into June 1st. Machine guns were eventually brought in by law enforcement, and there was very sporadic resistance from any of the Black Tulsans at this point. They knew they were outgunned, outmanned, and they were just trying to save their lives. So to call it a race riot is not even close to what happened. Look at this destruction. It looks like an atomic bomb went off. It looks like we dropped a nuclear bomb in Tulsa, Oklahoma. 35 square city blocks were destroyed. Almost 10,000 Black Tulsans were left homeless. Hundreds of people were killed. And the Black Wall Street area of Tulsa was completely demolished. And of course, that was the goal. To say anything else is a lie. How do we know this? Because this is a very telling caption right here. What does this say? running the Negro out of Tulsa, June 1st, 1921. So that, they've said it right here in black and white, that was the goal, to get back at this prosperous Black Wall Street neighborhood. It had nothing to do with a race riot. There was no uprising. This was personal. This was deliberate. This was hatred and revenge. So after a full night of murdering, burning things down, and looting the entire town, the National Guard is finally brought in around noon on June 1st. They imposed martial law, and they're going to shut this whole thing down. Any Greenwood residents who survived the night were rounded up by the authorities and were marched off to internment centers. So families, mom, dad, kids, anybody who made it through the night were considered criminals, arrested, rounded up at gunpoint, and marched through the street, hands in the air, to these internment centers. Many people were held captive for days against their will and were only allowed to be released if they were vouched for by an employer or a nice white citizen. So here's people who had been thriving a few days ago who are now basically prisoners of war. And we'll wrap things up in part 3.